Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave his much-anticipated address to Congress on Wednesday afternoon. Here are a few highlights from his fourth speech on Capitol Hill, one in which he clearly came to make the case for Israel's campaign in Gaza and get more assistance from the United States. Take a look.
Today, as Israel fights on the front line of civilization, I too appeal to America. Give us the tools faster, and we'll finish the job faster. With the exception of a single incident, where shrapnel from a bomb hit a Hamas weapons depot and unintentionally killed 24 people, the answer is practically none. You want to know why? Because Israel got the civilians out of harm's way, something people said we could never do, but we did it. Well, I have a message for these protesters. When the tyrants of Tehran, who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair, are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots. And my friends, I came to assure you today of one thing: we will win.
Netanyahu received several standing ovations throughout his speech, but not everyone was impressed. Michigan Congresswoman and the only Palestinian in Congress, Rashida Tlaib, sat through the whole address holding a double-sided sign that read, "War criminal," and on the other side, "guilty of genocide." Nancy Pelosi, who chose to skip the speech, posted on X, quote, "Benjamin Netanyahu's presentation in the House chamber today was by far the worst presentation of any foreign dignitary invited and honored with the privilege of addressing the Congress of the United States. These families are asking for a ceasefire deal that will bring the hostages home, and we hope that the Prime Minister would spend his time achieving that goal." Now, here to weigh in on all of this is Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome, Trita.
Thank you.
Now, I think that it reminds me of Teddy Roosevelt a little bit to hear him say, we're on the front lines of civilization. And this goes really to what the heart of what you do at the Quincy Institute is, which is to really bring U.S. foreign policy to a point where we're not this sort of reactionary imperial power in the world calling all civilizations that are different from us uncivilized simply because they're culturally different or what have you. Can you speak a little bit to how this is similar to U.S. interventionism and imperialism at the onset of America, that this is maybe nothing new?
Well, I mean, this is part of parcel of a foreign policy based on primacy, which is that we have to dominate every part of the world, because then you will end up getting countries like Israel or Ukraine or anyone else who have their own issues. And some of those issues may obviously be very legitimate. But in order to win America's support, then you have to come to the United States and say, we are fighting your fight. We are on the front lines of defending civilization against monsters that are out there whose real enmity actually is not just with us, is with you. And this then drags the United States into every possible conflict around the world. And that's exactly where we have been. I think people should by now be able to see the parallels quite clearly. And if we had a foreign policy that was much more immune towards these type of ideological arguments in which we're painting the world, as Netanyahu did, in black and white. It's very simplistic. It's good versus evil. In fact, Netanyahu was starting off about in his speech talking about good versus evil. Once you start painting the world like that, rest assured, you will always be in conflict, endlessly and rather meaninglessly, because their world is much more complicated than that. But nuance is the enemy of people like Netanyahu. And incidentally, what he has clearly in common with others who also like to paint the world in black and white, such as ISIS and other terrorist organizations, is exactly that. This enmity towards nuance, this favorability towards a very, very simplistic us versus them, good versus evil world. And of course, we're here to defend you, America.
So Netanyahu's visit to the U.S. comes at a very dynamic time in U.S. politics, with Joe Biden declaring that he will no longer be the Democratic presidential candidate. So enter Kamala Harris, a figure who obviously has served as vice president, but if she has a different or similar, I don't know what her foreign policy course necessarily will be. There's some dissension within the Democratic Party, with more progressive members of the base wanting a different Israel policy, others standing in strong support, like John Fetterman standing in strong support with Netanyahu, others dissenting. Do we have any indication which direction Kamala Harris might go on this, or whether Netanyahu's speech moves the ball in one direction or another? What is the future likely to hold in terms of U.S. support for what Israel is doing?
I don't think anyone really knows, because the issue hasn't been decided yet. I don't think Kamala Harris herself has fully made a decision. What we can see, however, is that, of course, there's a past in which she was very strongly in favor of rather hawkish Israeli policies. At one point, J Street actually chose not to endorse her because she was too far to the right in their view. But we also have seen that throughout these last couple of months, she has every once in a while diverged from the policy of Biden, including early calls for a ceasefire, which the White House tried to paper over. But it became clear afterwards that there actually was a substantive difference there. We also know that Phil Gordon, who is her national security advisor and who served in the Obama administration, left the administration rather humbled about how limited America's ability is to shape realities on the ground. He wrote some excellent articles in the Political and an excellent book about this, about how these regime change wars have made matters worse, and that during the Arab Spring, how difficult it was for the United States. It intervened in Libya, and the outcome was disaster. In Syria, it kind of intervened, but not really, and the outcome was disastrous there as well. And I think he left with a rather humble view that the United States simply doesn't have the capacity of turning these conflicts into what it wants it to be, and as a result should pursue a much, much more careful foreign policy. Now, I don't know whether his perspective has changed dramatically in the course of the last 4 years when he has served in the Biden administration on Kamala Harris's staff. But if he ends up being an influential voice in a future Harris administration, which he likely will be if she's elected, and if he is still of the view that he held when he left the Obama administration, then I would be surprised if there wouldn't at least be some changes. We have also, of course, seen that Kamala Harris has done something that Biden, over the course of 9-10 months, simply could not do because he didn't want to do, which was to muster at least a drop of empathy for the suffering of the Palestinians, more than 40,000 killed. He never could do that. And that's the first thing she did when she was asked about it. She started talking about how horrible it is. She expresses empathy. She talked about friends she knows who have lost tons of family members there. But that, while I personally welcome that, I think is absolutely necessary, it is not sufficient. There has to be a policy change. And I think that's where the progressive base of the Democratic Party is going to have its focus on, which is there going to be a change of rhetoric, or is there going to be a change of policy?
So it seems Nancy Pelosi's statement is critical of Netanyahu without going so far as to calling for his arrest or calling the war on Gaza a genocide or calling for a permanent ceasefire, which is what a lot of the progressive members would like to see happen. But there is some indication that there's support if Harris decides to take that path and be very critical of the Netanyahu administration and withhold military support. AOC posted yesterday that, just so we're clear, Netanyahu has lost so many people that he's addressing just a fraction of Congress. And the congressional reporter for Axios, Andrew Solinder, said, by my count, roughly 100 of the 212 House Democrats were present, and 27 of the 51 Senate Democrats are in the speech. So just around half of each caucus was absent there. What do you make of this decision?
This is it. I mean, it's really fascinating, particularly when you compare it to 2015, which I think about 60 plus Democrats sat that one out as well and held a press conference immediately afterwards and condemned him. At that point, of course, there wasn't a war in Gaza of the same magnitude that we see now. But then Netanyahu had come to the United States to speak against the president of the United States, Barack Obama, and the Iran nuclear deal at the time. And we saw that there was, for the first time, not just people sitting it out, but actively boycotting it, declaring that they were boycotting it. And this time around, we have almost twice that number of people. It shows you at the end of the day, Netanyahu has lost much, if not most, of the Democratic Party. And this is not an accidental loss. I think this has been part of his strategy. He has tried to make Israel a Republican issue rather than it being a bipartisan issue. He has tried to make sure that the actual base for support of Israel is the military-industrial complex and evangelical Christians rather than the Jewish American community. And to a large extent, I think he's been successful, but it's very fascinating to see that even among young evangelicals on the right, there is a shift away from Israel as well. So even though he's managed to push it himself out of democratic circles, I'm not so certain that the future that he thought that he would be able to have with the Republican Party is going to be as joyful as he envisioned it. Because if you are someone on the right, whether you identify yourself or MAGA or whatever it is, and you want to see an America First policy, and you're tired of endless wars, you're tired of meaningless wars in the Middle East, you're tired of fighting wars for other countries who claim that their fight is your fight. Well, there's no other country than Israel, and there's no other prime minister than Netanyahu that is pushing exactly that. So you really cannot be America First and then make an exception for Israel, because Israel is currently, at least, the country that more than anyone else is pushing the line of getting the United States to fight its wars. And particularly, that's the case when it comes to Iran. And that's not a new thing. That's something Netanyahu has done for more than 15 years now.
Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.